our God who comes to save, is here to set the captives free. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. Yeah, yeah. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining our online church experience here. My name is Derek Artero. I'm the South Hills Students Director here. If it's your first time joining us, would you do us a huge favor by texting SHGuest to 94090. That's SHGuest to 94090. That's going to be the best way for us to connect with you and send you more information about the church. You can also connect with us by checking out our Instagram page, our Facebook page, and even our website to stay up to date with all things South Hills. And our website is southhills.org/Burbank. And if you need somebody to pray with you, feel free to text SHPRAY to 94090 and someone will reach out to you. Also, parents, remember that we created an entire online experience for your kids to participate in church. And you can find all the materials that you need and the videos at southhills.org/online-kids. And we also have things for your students, so your middle school and your high school students. And you can find that at southhills.org/Burbank/students. Thank you so much for joining us again. Feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the service.
What kind of love is this that can't be counterfeit? Who is this God of earth and sky? He poured me from the clay and washed me in His grace and owns the mysteries of why. And we will declare His name. This is Jesus, this is Jesus, He who was and is and will be. This our Savior, He is with us, and forever He is alive. This is Jesus.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to South Hills Burbank online or to our podcast if you're listening. We're so glad that you're with us today. My name is Dave Stewart. I'm the campus pastor here, and I just want to say thanks for joining. A couple quick things before we jump into a brand new message today. I just wanted to say, man, we were so excited about our baptisms this past week. And if you watched the video, you saw the video just a second ago of the different baptisms we had. It was such a privilege to be able to baptize about 7 people, helping them to take their next steps and do it in a safe environment and not allow this quarantine, stay-at-home situation that we're currently in to keep us from helping people to take a next step in their faith. And that's what we're committed to do as a church, is helping people. So, man, it was such an incredible day. Rosie, who hosted it at her home, thank you so much, Rosie. And just the people and our teams and our staff all involved in helping to make it a special day. And the stories involved, we are going to hopefully be able to share some of those stories in the near future of what God is doing in people's hearts, and people that have never been to our church physically, who started attending online, who came and signed up to get baptized in water, and to hear the stories of people in our church is just absolutely incredible. So thank you for going public in your faith. That's what baptism is. So thank you for going public in your faith and showing what God's been doing inside of your heart. And anytime you're ready to take a next step in water baptism, you can always go to our website. We're gonna keep doing this as much as we can and as safe as we can as we progress as a church until we can gather back together and do them here. Or this may just be the new way we do baptisms. But either way, thanks for being a part of that. But I also want to let you know that we as a church are going to do something we've never done before. We've never really been the church that had a VBS, or a vacation Bible school. But this year we decided that we were going to step into this space because this year we were able to get our hands on something to go completely virtual with a VBS. So there's information that you're going to be able to see. That's you can go to our website, you can find information about it. You can go to all of our social media platforms, and we're going to be posting about it constantly because we want you to invite someone else to just participate in a virtual VBS. It's for preschoolers through 5th grade. It's going to happen from July 13th through the 15th. And it is a quarantine-friendly 3-day VBS. And so if you would help us in spreading the word, sharing some of that stuff on your social media, it's going to incorporate a bunch of different aspects of either live action fun and interactivity and all of that stuff. We just want you to be able to have a great VBS this summer to engage your kids and then also to just engage you as a parent with your kids. Usually it's just the children and parents, you get out of it and you just take off and do your thing. But we want to really make this a family event and a family activity together. So make sure you check out all the information. Look at our website, look at our social media. You have to register, and then we're having a packet pickup where you can pick up all the information and all the details that you're going to need to have a great VBS. So we're excited about it. We can't wait for it. The cost is super cheap. And you just want to make sure that you are completely registered and signed up by July 9th. That's the key date. By July 9th, you need to be registered and pay your $15 per kid, and that's going to cover supplies and t-shirts and all that stuff. So we can't wait to do that with you. But let's get ready to dive into today's message. So get a notepad, get your Bibles out, get your app ready, whatever it is that you need, and let's dive in for today. We wanted to share this message with you today. It's called The Power of Your Story. We want to talk about your story and why your story is so important, and that there's power and there's purpose within your story. Now, we all love a good story, and I don't know about you, but maybe you can remember back to when you were a kid, or maybe as a parent when you read to your kids, or maybe you have nieces or nephews or neighbors that you babysat and you read stories to them. I remember the stories that we read to our children when they were growing up, and it was so much fun to just sit in the bed with them. We'd lay down oftentimes, and we'd gather around and we would read stories together. Now, if you can think of these moments, every kid had their favorite book, right? I mean, every kid has their favorite book. And it's that book that you would read countless times. And as the adult who would read the book, you could probably recite the book because you read it so many times. And you better believe that the child knew every word in that book as well, although you kept having to read the same book over and over. And if you even tried to make the attempt of skipping a page, which I'm totally guilty of, they knew exactly what you skipped. And so you would have to go back, and sometimes they'd make you go all the way back to the beginning, and you try to talk your way and negotiate your way out of it, and you realize that's never going to happen, so you just start reading again. And we all had these moments. We all had these books that we loved and stories we loved. And if you're honest, you did the same thing when you were a kid. There were just certain stories that you loved to read. There are stories you loved to hear. Whether it was, The Cat in the Hat or Green Eggs and Ham. Maybe it was, one of the classics, Goodnight Moon. My kids loved the story of the monster at the end of the book, story of Grover. It's a hilarious book. Or we would read Yummy Yucky all the time. My kids loved taking time and especially reading things like Skippy John Jones. And it was referred to as, he's El Skipito who fought off the banditos. Or maybe your kids loved, like mine did, reading, The Reason for God. Just kidding. That's actually just there to make sure somebody's paying attention. But anyway, these books are books that my kids love to read, and my kids love to have read to them. And it was fun reading them, and you try different voices, and you make it engaging. But there's a reason why we like to hear stories over and over and over again, and we like to read some stories over and over and over again. It's because there's something about the story. There's something about the power of story that triggers our brains to go to a place of imagination. It allows us to go to a place of what if. And if this could happen, then what could become of that? And so it takes us to this incredible place of imagination, and then our imagination just gets set in motion. And especially, it's so cool to watch in a child's eyes when their imagination begins to go and they begin to add to the story. They begin to create within the story kind of their own version of the story. And for a lot of us adults, we've lost the ability to imagine. We've lost that ability to think beyond the story that's written in front of us or the story that's been written behind us in our lives. And even though there's some fond memories, there's some stories that we don't like to bring back up. There's stories that we don't like to talk about because they're painful. But I think we could all admit there's something about a good story. There's just something about it. And there's a reason to remember good stories. There's a reason to remember every story. And it's not just because it's a good story. It's because it's your story. And there's times that you and I need to take a pause. And that we need to reflect on our own stories. See, even if you don't realize that your story is an incredible one. Your story is an incredible story, even if you don't see how incredible your story is. And even though there's heartache, and even though there's probably a lot of disappointment, and even though there might be seasons of brokenness and disconnectedness, it's a great story. And oftentimes, there's something that's been happening. There's something that's been going on. There's a story that's being written, even though you and I might not be able to see it in the moment. And there's a reason. It's because there's power and purpose in your story. As messed up as you think your story is, and as broken as you might assume your story has been, there's power and there's purpose within your story. And I think it's something that you and I have to pause and think about and look back on and remember to see the importance of our story. So no matter how insignificant you think your story is, there's something incredible about it. And I don't know if you've ever given yourself the time and the space to just remember, to just sit down and reflect on your story, to write some things down or just to record it or whatever you need to do. I know for me, I oftentimes look back. I look back on maybe our early days of coming here, moving to Burbank. And I look at our story. And many of you don't know the full story of this church and how it all started. But I look back on little decisions that were made, little decisions that would impact other decisions the further the story went on. You may not know this, but for those of you that do, we'll just kind of walk down memory lane for just a moment. I think back to the decision that Carrie and I made when we were living in Arizona, and there was a time in our life of transition, and we got this phone call from a guy I've never met before. And we started talking, and one thing led to another, and we were invited to come visit this city called Burbank that we've never honestly heard of. We had no intention of ever moving here, but we were presented with an idea of a building. And so we flew out and we visited and we walked through this building, and eventually we were hired and we were handed the keys to this building that was in pretty not so great shape. It smelled, okay? Let's just be totally honest. If you remember the early days of this building, it smelled. It was gross. There was bad carpet everywhere and pews in the sanctuary and bad lighting fixtures and dirty walls. It was not well kept, but we saw something beyond that. And I think back sometimes to the very first parties that we had and gatherings that we had to just try to get people to start joining a team to create something new here. And so we hosted all these little events that really had nothing to do with church. It was just an opportunity for us to get to know people, because at that time we knew no one here. And so we knew nobody in a city that we've never been to do something that we have never done. We've never really planted a church before, but we had a great team. And we started to see the story of God begin to unfold in what we were doing. And so suddenly, if you were a part of the early years of this church, you remember. You remember the first 2 years or so of our church and how we met in the community room where we sit and hang out and have coffee and have our connect area. That's where our church originally started, was in that room. And you could sit in a room and you could listen to a sermon and just reach over and grab a donut hole. It was fantastic. But that's where we started. And for some reason, people kept showing up, even though the air conditioning hardly ever worked, and it was hot, and it was sweaty, and it was oftentimes gross. We just continued to grow. And we eventually packed out those 2 services, and we made the decision to raise some money, and through the generosity of this church, with a very small, early days, beginning church, we raised the money to come into the sanctuary and build it out and do all the things we wanted to do and remodel kids' spaces and all of that stuff. And we've been in this space for about the last 4 years or so. I think back to that one decision early on in our story, and how that one decision has impacted the lives of every person in my family, myself, my wife, my kids, how that decision would impact this church. It would impact our staff. It would impact those of you who met Jesus through this church. And maybe you had a relationship, but you had become very distant from church. And because of your relationship back to South Hills, you started to discover Jesus again. I think back to all of the different things that have happened because of that one decision to say yes and come here and to do something that was terrifying to do, in the midst of a broken story. See, but what we've realized is it's amazing what one decision can do to your entire life story. So the question really is, and that we oftentimes ask is, how did I end up here? I think that's a question that's very common for many of us. We sometimes sit up at night and we lay in bed and we wonder, how in the world did I end up here? How did I end up in this place? How did I end up at this point in my life with all of these dreams that maybe have gone unfulfilled, or all these things that have happened that I'm so excited that have happened? How have I gotten here? And it's oftentimes in those moments that we begin to reflect on our story. And it's a simple question, but it's a very complex answer, because you start to realize quickly that in any given moment, you've had a series of choices, and you've made a series of choices. And any choice that you made could have gone one way or the other. And because you went one direction, it would impact the entire rest of your story. See, there's something inside of us. It's inside of every one of us that's intrigued by a good story. And I think it's true for every person. We like to engage in the tale of other people. We like to understand what makes other people who they are. And when you begin to understand somebody's story, you begin to understand a little bit more about them. You start to understand what makes them tick and why they make certain decisions and why they do the things they do or why they act a certain way. And what we do is we want to see how stories ultimately end up. But we're also intrigued by the journey of that story. We want to know kind of what did it take to get somebody to the place that they ultimately are? What did it take to get to the end? And we want to understand the journey, the entire story. And the journey is really just part of telling your own story. I mean, think about it. The journey of your story is just a part of your human experience. The journey throughout your story is really just your human experience, what it means to experience life for you. So I have to just ask sometimes, because I look back on my own story and I see all these different moments of my life that could have gone one way or another. And sometimes I have to ask why. Why did I choose that direction? What would have happened if I would have gone the other direction? What if I would have said yes to this moment when I said no, or no when I said yes? Why do I have to go through certain things in my life? Why do I have to face certain times in my life that were extremely difficult? And why did that have to be part of my story? Why did that time of just brokenness, that thing that just impacted my heart, the thing that broke you down, why did that have to be part of your story? You see, there's an article that was in Forbes magazine, and they said this when they were talking about stories, really incredible article, but it said, a compelling story can evolve into a narrative that inspires a shared sense of mission, that in turn can lead to a long and great legacy. That's the power of story. See, a compelling story can evolve into a narrative that inspires a shared sense of mission. And I think that's exactly what's happened with the story of our church. There's something that's taken place. It's this story that has begun to evolve into a narrative that's inspired people to have a shared sense of mission, that we understand what the mission of our church is. To see people that are far from God come into a life-changing relationship with Him. And because of that shared mission, we all see how our stories have come together and how all of our individual stories have really become part of a greater story that God is telling through this place. See, story is at one time personal and real and relatable and emotional and connecting. A good story is all of those things at the same time. Now, based on dictionary.com, there's a very simple definition of story, and it's this. Story is an account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. And I think that's exactly what your story is. Your story is an account of all of the past events that have happened in your life, and it's the evolution of something that's taking place in you. Your story is your life evolving. Now, in order for something to evolve, there's an end goal, right? There's something that we're trying to evolve towards. And I want to show this to you here in just a moment. See, I think that's incredible. I think it's incredible to think about what your life is evolving into. Because we all want to know more about other people because we're tribal people. And so as tribal people, we want to understand other people's stories, and we want to see how their stories impact us. It's natural, and it helps us understand people better. It helps us to know people better because we finally know their story. So how do you and I learn about other people? Well, it's simple. We ask questions. We ask lots of questions. We probe and we ask why, and we usually get a story that better helps us understand a person's reality. And I don't know about you, but I personally love this. I love being able to sit down with somebody and ask the question, hey, what is your story? Tell me your story. And if they're a Christian, if they have a Jesus story, I love to ask them, would you tell me your Jesus story? I just want to know, what has God done in your life, and what's your journey been like? I love to learn about people, especially if a cup of coffee is involved. But I love to hear people's stories. I think it's why Jesus, who was a master storyteller, would always teach with parables. He would always teach through story, which a parable, at the heart of what a parable is simply a story that reveals a truth. That's all a parable really is. And so Jesus was constantly teaching through the power of story to reveal some type of truth that usually wasn't directly related to the parable. It was buried within. And oftentimes people didn't understand. So Jesus would have to pull his disciples aside after he would share a parable, and he would have to explain to them what truth he was trying to teach. So in Mark chapter 4, we're going to look at a passage here in just a second. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus is going to share a series of parables. He's going to share a series of parables to try to help reveal some deeper truth that's going on. And so he shares the parable of the farmer who scatters seeds. He shares the parable of the lamp and the parable of the growing seed and the parable of the mustard seed, just to name a few. And if you look at all of this, there's something that you may have never caught before. So I want you to look at this in Mark chapter 4, verse 33 and 34. Jesus used many similar stories and illustrations to teach the people as much as they could understand. Verse 34, in fact, in his public ministry, he never taught without using parables. I mean, just think about that. Jesus never taught without using parables, but afterwards, when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything to them. Did you notice that? That in Jesus' public ministry, he never taught in public without the power of story. He constantly was sharing stories. He was constantly putting a story in front of people to help engage their heart into a deeper truth that at the surface they didn't quite get. But they would slowly, as they thought about the stories, they reflected on the story, they would start to ask questions. And that's why he would explain to his disciples what he had just taught so that his disciples could then help people understand what he said. See, Mark calls out that Jesus didn't let the story just sit there. He talked about it with his disciples. In other words, he got into a small group and he started to share more about the story in greater detail. When he had a smaller audience, he would continue to explain things. He would relate it to the world that they knew. He would give insights. He would help them see and understand things that they didn't. And then he would empower them to continue that same tradition as they moved forward. He was so successful. He was so successful in these moments of interaction. He was so successful in these engaging moments of story that years later, the authors of the New Testament would sit down and remember these stories. And they would begin to write them down. They would record the stories that they remembered Jesus teaching, or they remembered people telling them that Jesus taught who were eyewitnesses. The impact was real. The impact of those stories were meaningful because that is the power of story. It's impactful. It's meaningful. And so what does all of this have to do with you and I? I mean, really, what does this conversation of the power of story have to do with you? Well, Jesus actually asks you and I to tell our story. He asks us to tell our story because he understood the power of story. It's why he never taught publicly without sharing stories. And so let's look at a couple of these stories. I want to show you a couple instances, and then I want to show you a couple people from our own church. And I want you to hear their story. In Luke chapter 8, we come across this incredible story of this demon-possessed man. Now, I don't know what this looked like, and I don't know what it would have been like. But all we know when you begin to read through Luke chapter 8 is that there was this crazy man in the hills. He was pretty much naked all the time. He terrorized people. They could hear him screaming at night. And you could imagine, just like I can, how terrifying of a scene this would have been. Well, we don't know the entire interaction, but we know that one day he meets Jesus. And Jesus is going to remove all of these demons from this man's life. And then the village is going to come out to see Jesus, and they're going to see Jesus and see this man fully clothed, sitting calmly at Jesus' feet. And they're baffled. They don't understand what happened. Their minds have been blown, and they're trying to figure out what on earth just took place. Now, they weren't ready to fully accept what happened. And so if you continue to read the story, you find out that Jesus is now going to get into a boat. He's going to cross over to the other side of the lake, and then this man comes up and runs right up to the edge of Jesus' boat. And he starts to beg Jesus to take me with you. Jesus, let me get in the boat with you. Let me go to the other side with you. Let me go with you. But look at what Jesus says in Luke chapter 8, verse 39. Jesus says no. The guy's like, please, Jesus, let me come in the boat with you. And Jesus is like, no. Go back to your family and tell them everything God has done for you. So he went all through the town proclaiming the great things Jesus had done for him. Did you catch that? Jesus, let me go with you. No, I want you to go share your story. I want you to go tell somebody else your God's story, your Jesus story, how your life has been completely transformed and changed because of Jesus. And before we look at another instance in Scripture, I want you to check out this story from someone in our church.
When I was 23, I had to watch my dad pass away from cancer, and through one of the most difficult sorrows I have ever experienced in my life. And when I would spiral into panic attacks because I didn't know how my mom and I were going to pay the bills without him here, I would hear that whisper in my ear of, keep your eyes on me and trust me. And he got us through. Looking back on it years later, he's always shown me that he was there holding my hand, being the light in that path. And the times when I just couldn't take it anymore and throwing my hands up saying, I can't do this, he would pick me up and carry me. He's not only strengthened me as a person, it's strengthened my relationship with him. And he has shown me the true meaning of unconditional love. So not only am I victorious because of Jesus, but I'm really happy.
In another story in Scripture, Jesus has died on the cross. He's been placed in a tomb. And what we read is that Mary comes out to visit the tomb. And we see this other interaction with Jesus. So again, if you have a Bible, go to John chapter 20. John chapter 20, verse 14, it says this, she turned to leave and she saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't fully recognize him. Verse 15, dear woman, why are you crying? Jesus asked her. Who are you looking for? She thought he was the gardener. I love that idea. Like she's not even paying attention. Maybe she's got her head down. Maybe she's a little distraught because Jesus isn't there. And so she thinks the gardener is asking her this question, but it's really Jesus. And she says, sir, if you've taken him away, would you tell me what you've done with him? And I will go and get him. And then verse 16. I love this moment. Jesus calls her by name, Mary. Mary, Jesus said. And she turned to him and she cried, Rabboni, or which is Hebrew for teacher. And she must have suddenly clung to Jesus because he says in verse 17, don't cling to me, for I haven't yet ascended to the Father, but go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to the Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, I have seen the Lord. Then she gave them his message. So what's happening there? Again, it's the power of story. What we know about Mary is that her story has been incredible. And Jesus has radically changed her life. And so she's coming to the tomb to either pay respects or to kind of perform some final ceremonial duties to Jesus' body in the tomb. And then she discovers that Jesus is gone. And not seeing and not recognizing Jesus standing there, he calls her by name. And she breaks. And Jesus quickly has to tell her, hey, I need you to get off me for a moment. I don't know if you've ever had that kind of clingy person in your life where you're like, hey, I just need a little bit of space. I've got something I need to say. Can you back up for just a second? That's kind of what Jesus is doing here. Probably not as rude as you and I would do it. He's being very gracious towards her. But he's like, listen, Mary, I have something I need you to do. I need you to run back and tell everyone. I need you to go share your story. I need you to go tell everybody what I've done, and I need you to give them this message. Again, Jesus is asking her to share her story to inspire other people. And I want you to listen to this next story from someone right here in our church.
When I was 22, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue an acting career with nothing but some inflatable furniture and some high heels and my Bible. I've had some really great highs and some super embarrassing lows, but through it all, I've just always gone back to my Bible to help me through the tough times or help me make a decision. I know that I've failed God many times, but I also know that He loves me regardless, and that because of Jesus, I'm never alone. So, although I don't have a very dramatic, exciting story to tell, I am grateful that I have a good one.
Now, and yet in another story, our last one that I want to look at this morning or together, it's a somewhat familiar story. It's one of my absolute favorites in the Bible, especially in the gospel stories. It's such a great encounter with Jesus. But Jesus is going to talk to this Samaritan woman. She's sitting by a well, and there's a lot that we could dig into. We're not going to take the time right now to dig into all the nuance of this story. But there's a lot of complexity between Jews and Samaritans, and the fact that a rabbi shouldn't be speaking to a woman, and why was she at the well in the middle of the day? There's all these things going on here. But I want you to see the interaction that was recorded by John. So in John chapter 4, verse 25, it says this: "The woman said, 'I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us.' Then Jesus told her, 'I am the Messiah.' And just then his disciples come back. They were shocked to find him talking to a woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, 'What do you want with her?' or 'Why are you talking to her?' The woman left her water jar beside the well, and she ran back to the village, telling everyone, 'Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?' Verse 30 said the people came streaming from the village to see him." You see, I love this story, one of my favorites, because Jesus does something incredible. He sits with a woman and he actually tells her her own story. He reminds her of all of the pain of her story. And then he reveals who he is. It's the first time he's done this. He hasn't revealed himself to anyone else, but in this moment, he's going to reveal who he is to this Samaritan woman who's broken. Her life is in shambles. She's living in shame and guilt. And Jesus is going to repair her story. And then he's going to send her off. And she runs off. She tells everybody her story so that people will come to Jesus. And this is the last one that I want to share with you, but take a moment and listen to this last story from someone here in our church.
I grew up in the church. My mom had my brother and I in church every single Sunday, every single Wednesday. It was when I got outside of college and I graduated that I really started to spiral. I was jumping from toxic relationship to toxic relationship. I was following my own ambitions, my own desires, and it led me to a place where I felt extremely broken and alone. And it was about a year ago that I really got to a place where I hit rock bottom. And I realized that the only thing that was going to make me feel and have that hope again was Jesus and having a relationship with him and going back to having that relationship. I feel like now, because Jesus is in my life and because he's transformed the way that I live and he's given me a new purpose, I can now have the opportunity to show other people his love, show other people his kindness, and use my talents and gifts to give God glory and not just satisfy my own earthly desires and my own passions.
Now, with all of these stories, I think the question that we have to ask is why? Why is your story so important? Why is my story important? Why are the stories of the people that shared in this message so important? Why are these stories of people in Scripture so important? Why is there power within your story? And what's the purpose of your story? Did you really have to go through all of those difficult moments of your past to get to the place that you are now? And if you did, why? Why did you have to go through all that? Well, I'll tell you this, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think you'll ever know why you had to go through all of it. But there's definitely power and purpose within your story. As a matter of fact, Jesus tells us exactly what you and I should do with our story. Matthew chapter 28. We've looked at this many times, verses 19 and 20. Oftentimes referred to as the Great Commission, but it says this in verse 19. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Verse 20. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands that I've given to you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. In verse 20, Jesus is very clear that we have to teach. We have to teach people that are coming into faith, people that are coming into an understanding of who Jesus is, to obey all the commandments that God has given to us, that Jesus has taught us. And how do we do that? I think we teach through story, because that's exactly how Jesus taught. Jesus never taught publicly without the use of story, and I don't think we're intended to teach everything without the use of our own story. See, your story is not just for you. You didn't go through all the things you went through in life just for you to remember that there is someone. There is someone in your world, there is someone in your community, there is someone in your workplace that desperately needs your story to be shared. There is somebody around you right now that needs you to share your past story. If you're a parent, your kids need to hear your story. They need to hear what God has taken you through in life. They need to understand, obviously in an age-appropriate way, but they need to understand what God has done in your life. So go and tell someone your story. Go and let somebody know what God has done. See, some of us can look back on the series of events in our life and we can see God's hand guiding us every step of the way, every decision that we've made, every choice that we had to take. And we didn't understand why that one was in front of us at the time. But looking back on it, we can see God's hand guiding us every step of the way. See, some of us can see how God guided us and kept us safe. Some of us can see how God maneuvered our bad choices to bring us into a better place, that we made some decisions and they weren't the right decisions. We ran in a direction that we shouldn't have run, and God has maneuvered our lives in a way to bring us back to a different place. And some of us can see how everything in our entire lives have been unfolding to bring us back to Jesus. See, your story is incredibly important. There's such power within your story. But here's the thing I want you to understand as we wrap things up. You were never meant to just sit on your story, but to share it with someone else. You were never intended to just sit on your story and keep it for yourself. That your story is for someone else to hear, because your story could inspire someone else to begin trusting in Jesus the way you have. It could change someone's entire life because you're willing to share it. So let me ask you, could you imagine what it would be like? Could you engage your imagination, your childish imagination, in what it would be like if you and I took the time to share our stories, and how much God could impact other people's life through your story? I mean, could you imagine how many people that have questions, how many people that wonder if Jesus is real, if God really cares, the moment they heard your story and they saw how much Jesus cared about you, how much God loves you, how much your story could impact their life, how your story could help somebody finally see it all. So let me encourage you with something. Let me encourage you to take a next step today to respond to what we're talking about. Today we're kicking off a campaign to help you tell your story. Matter of fact, our team has been working kind of behind the scenes on a special project. And so I want to encourage you. If you go to our website, southhills.org/Burbank/story, we've created an entire back page to help you tell your story. There's a spot where you can click on it and you can write your story. There's some questions that kind of help prompt your thinking, and you could write it out and send it to us. There's a section that if you're not a great writer and you would rather tell your story, where you can record it. We'll actually tell you exactly what to do to record it correctly and then to send it to us. And you can upload it right there on our website. But here's the reason for doing this. We want to begin as a church to capture the power of story, not to use it, not to market your story, but so we can impact people's lives through the power of your story. That there are people in our community that need to hear your story. And so if you will, take some time today, take some time this week to just sit and think, to write it down, to jot down some notes of what has God done in your life. Maybe ask yourself some of the questions on that website, on our southhills.org/Burbank/story. And take some time to share your story. So that's the big next step. But for some of us, you need to take the first step. And the first step is understanding that your story, your entire life, has been guiding you to this moment. This moment of just saying yes to Jesus. I mean, you've been trying everything on your own, and you look back on your life and you see all the times that you've made decisions and they weren't the best decisions. And they've taken you in a direction that you never intended to go. Can I just tell you that God has never taken his hand off of you, and Jesus has never stopped loving you. And so today is your chance. So I want to encourage you today to respond by just saying yes. Stop waiting for some perfect set of circumstances or some perfect moment, but maybe today, after hearing some other people's stories, you'd realize how much you need Jesus. And if that's you, in the description below, you can simply click on the link that says, I said yes to Jesus. You can let us know. You can text the phrase, I said yes, to 94090. But whatever it is that you choose to do, we just want to help you begin to walk out this journey, this new relationship with Jesus. And I just want you to know how proud we are of you. To make a decision like this is such a huge moment, but this is where your story has been taking you. And I think today you could begin writing a new chapter and allow Jesus to help you write a brand new chapter in your story. And maybe you've already said yes to Jesus. And maybe you're in a place where you just need to start sharing your story with someone. That there is someone around you that needs to hear your story. So would you take the necessary time today, sometime this week, to sit down and think about it, to pray about it, to reflect on it? Because I think God wants to use our story as a church and as our story as individuals to impact the world around us. Now, in just a moment, we're going to pray. We're going to sing one last song together. And the song that we're going to sing is a brand new song. It's actually a brand new South Hills music song that's not technically getting released for a couple more days, but luckily Steve is the one who helps us. He's our worship pastor. He's behind all the South Hills music, so we kind of have the inside man for this. So there's a new song that's going to be played right after we pray. It's called This Is Jesus. We want to take a moment and share this song with you. So would you just sit? Would you listen? And I believe it's just in a couple of days, it's going to get released publicly and you'll see all of that information. But I can't wait for you to hear this song, and I can't wait for you and I to begin to share our story, because this is what Jesus has called us to do. So would you bow your hearts and pray with me? Jesus, thank you. We're so grateful today and overwhelmed that you are a God that cares for each and every one of us, that you have accepted our story, and that you are continuing to help us and guide us as we sift through it. Jesus, thank you that our story isn't something we should ever be ashamed of or embarrassed about, that our story is a story of redemption. It's a story of hope and forgiveness and healing and salvation. And so for those who have yet to begin their story of redemption, I pray that today would be their day, that they would say yes to you, that they would take some time to wrestle with this decision. And I pray as they do that you would remind them of how much you love them. And that as a church, we couldn't be more proud of the decision that they're making today. And for the rest of us, Jesus, again, help us to take all the next steps that we need to. As we take this next step to share our story, would you give us boldness and confidence to share the story that you have been writing in us? So help us to see the power and the purpose of our story, and to know that all we're asked to do is share it. All we're asked to do is to share our story, and the rest is up to you. So it's in your name we can pray it. Amen.
What kind of love is this that can't be counterfeit? Who is this God of earth and sky? He poured me from the clay and washed me in his grace, and owns the mysteries of why. And we will declare his name. This is Jesus, this is Jesus, he who was and is
Hey, everybody, thank you so much for just being with us today. And thank you as we take a moment today to just remind you of the way in which you can give. There's a bunch of different ways that you can give, and you can tithe, or you can express your generosity, whatever way you want to do that. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the way that you're giving, you're tithing, you're serving, you're loving people. There's so many different ways that you can do that, and you impact the community around us with a message of hope constantly. Just this last week, as you give, I just want to remind you, just this last week, we were able to present several different needs to our church. And within the matter of hours, not days, not weeks, hours, every single one of those needs were met. There's serving opportunities that we presented that filled up like that. There was a need for children through the care portal, and that need got met immediately. There was a situation where the Landing up the street from us, it's a home for kids that have aged out of the foster system. They needed some towels and they needed some other items. And within hours, incredible amounts of money were raised so that we can purchase so many items and then bonus items for the Landing. And I just want you to know how much I love how much you love our community, how much you love people, and you express it constantly in the way you love Jesus and in the way that you are generous. And so thank you so much for all of that. Now, I can't wait for this next week, and for next weekend, we have a special guest that's gonna kick off our brand new series, This Is Us. So make sure you're here next week. Make sure you share this message with somebody if there's somebody that you think would benefit from it. But whatever the situation is this week, God bless you guys, and I can't wait to see you next week.